Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Thank you very much.
Now, this morning we have just heard, as we came on air, that Nissan has confirmed that it will build not just the new Qashqai car, but also the X-Trail SUV in its Sunderland plant. It's the first major industrial development for the car industry since the Brexit vote. Now, the Japanese company's commitment to Britain's biggest car plant, it is that already, followed some doubt post the referendum, but that doubt has now been removed this morning. And with GDP figures out today, which show the British economy bucking expectations of substantial slowdown, well, it looks as if some Brexiteers will no doubt be saying, I told you so. The Office for National Statistics showed that between July and September, the economy grew by 0.5%. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, said he was pleased with the figures.
Well, the economy has proved to be very resilient. We went into the referendum, I think the figures now show, stronger than we thought at the time, and the economy has held up very well since. But we are going to have a period of uncertainty ahead as business waits to see the outcome of the European Union negotiations, and we have to make sure that we are prepared and ready to support the economy during that period to make sure that we get a successful outcome to the negotiations and successfully support the economy through that period.
The Chancellor. Now, before the European referendum, predictions were being made of an immediate and significant impact on the UK economy if the country voted to leave. David Cameron said it would put a bomb under the UK economy. George Osborne warned of a do-it-yourself recession. But so far, these short-term predictions have not come to pass. So how has the economy been faring since the 23rd of June? The star bakers in the economic kitchen have been producing some sweet treats. As we've been hearing, GDP grew by 0.5% between July and September this year. That's Q3. It's better than expected. The Bank of England had predicted a flatter rate of 0.1%. Now, the employment rate, percentage of all the people employed against the labour force, is currently 74.5%. That's the joint highest it's been since records in this index began in the 1970s. And consumer confidence has also been looking pretty tasty. In September, the retail sales figures, well, they were up over 4% on the same month last year. But it hasn't all been sugar-coated. There have been some post-referendum soggy bottoms. The pound has been falling pretty steadily against the dollar and the euro, other currencies. It reached a 31-year low earlier this month, though it's rebounded a bit since then, not by much. Inflation jumped to 1% in September. That's not great news for consumers, I guess, coming up to Christmas. The CPI index, which is how we measure it these days, is the highest it's been for nearly 2 years, but it's still only 50% of the Bank of England's target of 2%. And at the weekend, the British Bankers Association warned that there could be an exodus from the city. Smaller banks this year, bigger ones next year. According to the lobbying group, major banks are poised to hit, quote, the relocate button. Well, to look at all this, we're joined by Patience Wheatcroft and the Telegraph columnist Liam Halligan. Welcome to you both. So, most of these short-term predictions haven't come true, have they?
Things have not got bad yet, but they will.
But we were told, and your side of the argument told us, that they would be bad by now. It was going to be an immediate effect. A vote to leave, said the Treasury, would cause an immediate and profound economic shock.
Well, the Treasury was slightly exaggerating, and I wouldn't go along with that. Any decisions that were taken ahead of Brexit would take some time to impact.
But it wasn't just the Treasury. It was David Cameron, George Osborne, the Bank of England, the IMF, the OECD, and even at one stage, the World Bank. They all said the impact would be immediate. And they were wrong, weren't they?
They were wrong. The impact hasn't been immediate, but it is already impacting, as you're hearing and you mentioned, on banks that are now having their finger poised on the trigger.
But we don't know that to be true. Could you name a bank that's got its finger poised on the trigger?
I certainly could.
Okay, which one?
HSBC is thinking about what to do. Every bank is
HSBC has ruled out leaving it. It spent 18 months.
Not leaving.
It spent 18 months thinking of relocating its headquarters to Hong Kong and decided it would stay here.
Andrew, they're not going to move everybody out, but they will move people, and they're going to move people.
Are they going to move people?
I don't think they are. I think this is lots of bluster and hot air, just like the car makers. You know, Nissan said in 2002 if we didn't join the euro, they'd leave the UK. They said if we voted for Brexit, they'd leave the UK. What have they done? They've just confirmed that they're actually going to increase their investment in the UK. It's part of the CEO of a big bank or a big car maker's job to occasionally hold the gun to the government's head and see what you can get from them. That's what we've seen.
But we don't know what Nissan has been promised to make them stay.
I agree. I don't think the government. I think the government should have called their bluff. I think they took advantage of an inexperienced.
Well,
government.
we don't know what the government's done yet, but it's probably no more than the French government would have done.
Nevertheless, it's a deal that has obviously been done behind closed doors.
The big question, Colin, I guess, is what Theresa May has had to give Nissan to convince them to make this decision, because they could have gone to other locations. There are other countries around the world that would love to have this sort of business. Carlos Ghosn, the president of Nissan, he met Theresa May at 10 Downing Street fairly recently, and it's on the statement that they've put out today. He said that he was happy with the assurances that she's been given him. But as I say, we really don't know what they are. It's probably not some sort of cash lump sum, because that would be an infringement of World Trade Organization rules. Don't forget, after Britain leaves the EU, we're no longer going to be subject to EU rules on state aid, but World Trade Organization rules, which explicitly rule out export subsidies, will still very much be in play. So one wonders what other promises Theresa May has perhaps given Carlos Ghosn. Very, very tough businessman. As I say, he also runs Renault and Nissan closely bound together. In the French media, he's known as Le Cost Killer. He's as I say, that really sums up what a hard man he is. But we spoke to Colin Mather. He's Vice President of Manufacturing at Nissan a little earlier, and this is what he told us about this arrangement.
We can't have any specific assurances because we don't know where we're going to end up. But we do have an assurance to the government that they will work through whatever circumstances come in front of them and come in front of the industry, so that one by one we'll find the countermeasures to the problems and we'll end up competitive in the end. So it's really so complicated at the moment. You can't go on more than assurances that we will work together, we will trust each other, and we will come to a solution in the end that's great for the UK population.
And Ian, there'll be harder days than this for government spin doctors, won't they? Not only have they got that micro good news about Nissan, but macro-wise, these GDP figures looking pretty rosy too.
Yes, that's right, Colin. The GDP growth for the third quarter of the year came in at 0.5%. That was down on 0.7% in the second quarter of this year, but better than the 0.3% that the market had been looking for. Scratch beneath the surface, though, and the numbers aren't really as great as they might seem. For example, all of this growth has come from the services sector. Now, services is getting on for 3 quarters of UK GDP. The service sector expanded by 0.8% during the quarter, so that's pretty encouraging news. But you look to the other parts of the economy, manufacturing and construction both contracted during the quarter, and that is a shape of the kind of anxiety that some people have. It's business investment as well. That didn't have a particularly good quarter either, so that's potentially pointing to problems further down the line, and that's why Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, has been warning that there will be tougher times to come. Most people expecting GDP to slow down in 2017. It really looks, Colin, as though what happened during the third quarter was that the economy was borne aloft, essentially, by very, very strong consumer spending, and I think that's really no surprise. You saw there was so much talk of project fear, if you like, ahead of the referendum, and indeed the economy did slow down dramatically during July. Once people realised that it was business as usual, that we hadn't actually left the EU, we were still part of the single market until such time as we actually leave the EU, I think people just knuckled down and thought, right, well, it's business as usual. And as I say, consumer spending pretty robust during the quarter. We've been on the back of several quarters now during which average earnings have been outstripping inflation, and that's something that we haven't really seen that much of since the financial crisis. So no real surprise to see consumer spending buoyant, and I think that's largely what was behind these numbers today.
Obviously, sweeteners are a lot allowed, but I wonder what sort of conversations might have taken place. Well, that's the $64 million question, isn't it? Or pound question, certainly not euro question, isn't it? About exactly what assurance were given. We know that the Prime Minister hosted Carlos Ghosn, the Chief Executive Chairman of Nissan, a couple of weeks ago. But also Greg Clark, the Business Secretary, flew out to Japan to meet with Nissan. And so clearly assurances were given. Assurances that have persuaded Nissan that has a complicated supply chain stretching across Europe. And I think it's worth just stepping back a second. You know, the single market that's been much debated over the past few weeks and months, it essentially grew out of the car industry. So it's intrinsically linked to the idea of the single market. But the government's giving no guarantees on that issue. But Nissan were reassured to build not just the new Qashqai, but also a new model, the X-Trail, into the 2020s. So they've been reassured. There has been some suggestion that if there were, and no one thinks it's particularly likely, but it's possible that you could get these tariff payments on imports and exports. If that were to happen, Nissan has confirmed that they were given some sort of assurances that the overall competitive position would remain. Now, perhaps that's a reference to the fact that the pound has fallen and that benefits those goods that are manufactured in the UK. Perhaps it's a reference to something else, some sort of competitive payment. And if that's the case, then you expect pretty much all the other car manufacturers to be queuing up at number 10 asking for the same deal. The Labour Party, the Shadow Chancellor, eventually did welcome this idea of Nissan building these cars in Sunderland, one of its heartlands, but said that there were some issues more generally about the coherence of the Brexit strategy. This is what John McDonnell told me about a couple of hours ago.
The problem that we've got now is that rather than the government looking to prepare a comprehensive plan for our future relationship with Europe, we're getting these ad hoc announcements. A couple of weeks ago, we heard that they were discussing a special deal for the City of London, possibly including contributions to the EU that the rest of the country will have to pay. We now hear a particular deal for Nissan, which I welcome, but there has to be a comprehensive approach, because other car companies, other manufacturers will be coming forward now and say, well, what about us?
Well, what does it matter if it results in the production of cars in Sunderland, for which there was a question mark over it, is going to go from 475,000 a year to 600,000 a year. Over 7,000 jobs secured. It will become a super plant in Sunderland now. Not one, but 2 new cars will be produced. What bigger vote of confidence could you want?
It depends how much you're paying for it. And we don't know how much we're paying for it.
Well, it would have to be a lot for it not to be worth it.
It probably would be a lot, and it would be a lot that would then have to be paid to the other car manufacturers. And if jobs in the car industry are important, what about other jobs in manufacturing?
I share Patient's reticence on this, actually. I think governments have to face down big, powerful manufacturers and other companies in the financial services industry too. We've got to show confidence. There's a case to invest here, Andrew, in the UK on its own merits. We've just been voted one of the best places in the world to do business despite the Brexit vote.
It's not all good news, though. Even in the short term, the 0.5% third quarter figure is strong, much stronger than the Project Fear forecasts. Well, actually, it takes us back to the OBR forecast of March at the budget. But the only sector to grow was services. Every other sector, construction and manufacturing, industrial production, all down.
I agree. I've written for many years my concerns about the imbalances in the UK economy. I actually think, yes, we have a hard GDP number now for a post-Brexit vote quarter, but it is just a preliminary number. I'm not crowing about this number as a Brexiteer. I'm saying there is still a lot of imbalances. I'm very concerned about the amount of QE that we're still talking about, the fact that we've just cut interest rates, which was completely the wrong thing to do in my view. I'm not completely happy at all, but it's clear that the Treasury and the other fearmongers, they really need to take a bow.
and the issue is here, if they got the forecast of the last 3 months wrong, if they couldn't even tell us what was going to happen in July, August and September, why would you trust them to tell us what's happening in 3 to 5 years' time?
I don't think you should trust economists to tell you what's going to happen at any stage, quite honestly. I'd rather wait and see.
But it was used all during the referendum campaign.
I would rather wait and see what happens, because Brexit was the vote taken in June. Any decisions taken post that will not have taken effect yet. These are long-term decisions.
Yeah, but as
and
I
wait
say,
until next year when you see inflation kicking in at 6 to 7% in food prices, maybe even more. The British consumer will then have to lock down.
Okay, well, we don't know what the inflation... I think we don't know by how much. But it's fair to assume, as Patient Wheatcroft says, that inflation will rise.
I agree.
Now, there are two dangers here as not in the economy next year. Put aside forecasts, just look at the macroeconomics of it. One is there's a danger that that prices will now rise faster than wages.
Yep.
That will crib consumer spending, which is almost 70% of the economy. And the second is because of the inevitable uncertainty, both domestic business investment and foreign direct investment are likely, I put it no higher than to go on pause. Both of these could really slow the economy next year.
I completely agree. I said before the referendum and have said since, clearly, however Brexit is done, there's going to be an impact on the long-term decisions of businessmen and women that make real moves with money rather than sit in TV studios and talk about it. That's why, Andrew, I don't want a long, drawn-out row with the rest of the European Union that will make us look very business unfriendly and as if we don't know what we're doing. That's why I want a clean Brexit. That will minimise the inevitable business uncertainty.
And I'm afraid the truth is we don't know what we're doing as a country. We've got 3 Brexiteers who are complaining that people in Europe aren't being very nice to them.
Are they? Who's
Well, they're being a lot nicer
Liam
than...
Fox.
He said people in Europe are not being very nice. Has he said
I
that?
paraphrase.
Okay.
But he was upset by the reception he was getting, and he thought that we should get a more positive reception.
I thought he'd be mainly going to Canada.
I think we should
and
knock the
Australia.
Eurocrats into touch. I mean, they're
But
just grandstanding, protecting their pensions and their per diems. We need to dismantle this bureaucracy.
Oh, how cynical.
You are
it's all
a
realistic.
former
As a
trade
taxpayer.
union leader of what at that time was the biggest union in the country. The news for Sunderland is fantastic this morning, isn't it?
It is very good, very good. I hope also that the government will recognise that all the eggs in the basket of Nissan won't be healthy for the area. There needs to be infrastructure and jobs down the line based in that area so that everybody benefits. So I think that's something that needs
But
to
it
be
looks
thought
like the
about.
plant itself is going to expand, and that will
Indeed.
have both direct and indirect impact
absolutely.
in the northeast.
Oh, it will.
And it has among the highest productivity of any car plant in the world.
But people in the northeast, despite the fact that many of them have had good jobs in Nissan for a long time, voted in big numbers to come out of Europe. Now, they must have felt dissatisfied with how the economy was treating them. So I do think account has got to be taken of all of that. What's the knock-on effect for people in the northeast? For many of them is going to be good, but don't leave out those who are a bit more on the periphery.
Are you surprised that a lot of the short-term, and I emphasise short-term, forecasts have turned out to be far more gloomy than the reality?
No, I'm not surprised.
You're not?
No, I thought it would be gloomy. And,
No, but what I'm saying is it's been far less gloomy. The forecasts were more gloomy than the reality.
Well, actually,
The Treasury was forecasting we'd enter
but the
recession.
reality for some people is pretty gloomy, isn't it?
No,
I mean, what goes on at a macro level is one thing. What happens when you go out and you change your pound notes into euros, and you find you don't get as many euros as you would have liked? You know, I mean, you were talking a moment ago about immediate effects. Well, between June and September, 3 months, that's pretty quick in the great scheme of things. People going on holiday, and lots of people on what you might call ordinary wages, go to Euro countries on holiday because traditionally that's been quite a good bargain. They then find that actually that's really was much more expensive.
But what's
than
more
they
important to
thought.
the future of the country? The ability for people to go abroad on holiday cheaply, or the ability of Nissan and Jaguar and Rolls-Royce and British Aerospace to sell their goods abroad more competitively?
Why does that have to be an either or?
Because the currency makes it an either or.
Well, the country would go round in a much more happy and beneficial way if more people had more money in their pockets to put into the economy to spend, so it comes back.
Which
that's what's been going wrong
Which
for such a
may
time.
be a difficulty next year if inflation starts
Well,
exceeding
absolutely.
wages. Patience Wheatcroft, while I've got you here, there's reports that you're part of a group of peers plotting to undo the referendum result. What's the truth?
There's certainly no plot. I think that there are a number of people, both in and out of the House of Lords, who very much regret the decision that was taken. But
what are you trying to do?
We feel there should be a vote in Parliament at least. Because
On
if
what?
this is all about sovereignty of Parliament and sovereignty of the country, then the sovereignty of Parliament demands that this should not be a decision, pressing the button on Article 50, should not be a decision just for the Prime Minister. It's too much for any individual to take.
But the country voted on June the 23rd, over 17 million people, to do just this. What gives you, as an unelected peer, any democratic legitimacy in this?
The country voted, not by an overwhelming majority, but nevertheless the country voted in favour of Brexit, not knowing what Brexit means. And we're still told Brexit means Brexit. We don't know what it means.
But who elected you?
I'm not elected.
So what gives you any democratic legitimacy on this?
I don't have a right to overturn the will of the people at all.
But you would vote against triggering Article 50, wouldn't you?
Until we're clearer what lies ahead.
So you would interfere with the will of the people. As an unelected peer, you would vote against the wishes of the 17.4 million people on June the 23rd.
Well, be that in the House of Lords we vote against what you call the will of the people. It may well be. But whether we vote against and it goes through to any action is a secondary matter, isn't it?
The House of Lords has a duty, doesn't it?
It does.
To say to the Commons,
to analyse,
just think about this, make sure before you do it. It's not a right to overturn, but it's a duty.
But what's the point of voting against it if you don't overturn it?
To let more detail come through so that we know what it is we're voting for.
Yeah.
If we reverse this vote, Andrew, I'm afraid that a lot of the public's faith in mainstream politics will be severely dented in this country.
Okay.
I think a lot of people are feeling deeply uncomfortable by the rising tide of nationalism.
But the majority voted. It was a clear majority.
I don't
The
think
government were handing out literature to people's homes at our expense, saying the government will implement your decision.
I
Quote.
don't think it's possible to vote against what the will of the people. I think that would cause mayhem.
All right. On that, then, let's leave it there because we need to move on. We've actually spent more time. Thank you both for being with us.
I've been getting away with it all my